I've heard you say now that there needs to be change in policing. Is that perspective something that you've adopted over the last couple of years? Is it a lifelong perspective? But if it is recent, what prompted the change?
Well, I think for me, it's always been the philosophy. When I became sheriff, one of the reasons I ran for sheriff was the Monroe County Jail and what we could do with the inmate population while they're inside the jail. And we created those systems over the last 2 years to help people while they're incarcerated. People that want help while they're incarcerated, we got some of the best opportunities in society to help them out and get them off that path of criminality into a path of success. So it's always been my mindset, my philosophy. These are human beings we're dealing with. Some are criminals, we got it, that are doing criminal activity because they're bad people. But a lot of people get stuck in systems. A lot of people grow up in poverty. A lot of people make bad decisions. So we got to remember that too. Do your crime, do your time, but there should be an afterlife after that. So that's always been my philosophy of policing. I don't know how many breaks I've cut in my police career. People that I have empathy and compassion for, right? And go along, move along. Like the two ladies I stopped after the riots on May 30th. Don't come back. Those are the types of philosophies that I've always had as personally. And then of course, the modern day society is just taking that to a whole new level, and the opportunity that we have. You look at right after Mr. Floyd's passing, that Friday, before the unrest in Rochester, every police chief was together on a Friday night at 5:30 talking about what can we do, right? And that's before the protest started. So I think there's also an opportunity to look at things from a totally different paradigm and have those conversations.
As you have those conversations, as you look at it from a different paradigm, are there any specific changes that are new to you that you're now considering?
Yeah, we talk about mental health, right? So we've created, the city, all the police departments and the Monroe County Mental Health created these FIT teams, right? And we realized years ago that we don't have the expertise, let alone sometimes the capacity to do the long-term solutions to a mental health issue. So we started going to jobs together with FIT professionals. Now we're looking at, would we really have conversations about how about some of these calls we could triage through a certain matrix for safety, of course, for everybody involved. And then other people might be able to take some of this burden off us, some of this workload off us, but also respond with someone that's more capable. And we've done that for years in police and fire calls. We're dispatched to every police and fire call in the county. Every fire and EMS call. We're dispatched to everyone for safety and security. But a lot of times we'll triage that call. We've been there multiple times, so just let the ambulance advise, right? So there's ways to come up with not only practices, but also policies to have these conversations. And I think that's where we're at. If we sit down at the table and logically think through some of these things, maybe we can have a better response that may solve problems long term. Because we know a deputy or a police officer at 3 o'clock in the morning responding to a chaotic situation is not going to be able to solve the long-term ills, whatever is occurring in that household or in that community.
Folks at the Black Lives Matter movement will say the defund police motto really means taking some money away from funding for armed officers and moving it into those types of teams. Is that something when you say you can talk about when you get at the table?
Yeah, so you look at those types of things and first of all, it's got to be systematic. I hear a lot of talk right now. I hear millions of dollars being thrown around the community, right? And it all sounds good, but if you don't set up a system for safety and security, some of these calls are violent. Some of these calls, people are having difficult times. The reason why someone's calling 911 is there's chaos, right? Something's gone seriously bad. That's why the phone's being dialed. So you got to set up systems with strategic planning involved. With that being said, you can also measure those calls, right? So if you looked at how many mental health calls we go to, how many mental health transports we make, and maybe it's a police officer there for 45 minutes, 2 police officers for 45 minutes, but then one officer follows that person to the hospital and changes custody from us to the hospital. That's another 45 minutes, an hour. If a civilian could do that for us, and then actually be a mental health professional that could do that mental health handoff from the house to a mental health professional, think how cleaner that handoff would be, right? How much follow-up could be done, how much transfer of knowledge from a mental health community, as opposed to a police officer just make sure that person's got to the hospital, right? So, you can measure those things and then actually look at dollar bills and say, all right, if they're going to take that workload off a sheriff's department, then how do we take some of that funding and transfer it over here? Again, that doesn't offend me. A lot of my friends that wear blue uniforms might be offended, but that conversation doesn't offend me. If we're taking that burden, that workload off the deputies and police officers that really aren't designed to be there anyways. But again, it's got to be with strategy. It's got to be with strategic thinking. It's got to be well thought out because there's a safety and security need there too. Denny Wright, we know Denny Wright responded to a mental health call that he was very familiar with in that area and been around there as a cop forever. And that one ended up coming back to bite him. So it's got to be well thought out. It can't just be emotional and we need money. There needs to be a process.
How's the morale in the department right now?
Yeah, morale is something I came back from Albany yesterday and I asked my undersheriff on the way back, how's morale? I'm very concerned about morale. You know, COVID really gave us a hard time and put a lot of extra work in on our deputies. The passing of Mr. Floyd, you know, we've worked every day. These deputies are out there working every day. The city police department is obviously working hard, and they're doing their job, you know, and we have to be responsible for safety and security. Again, it's our function, so we can't assume nothing's going to happen. May 30th, it can never happen again in Rochester, New York. We cannot have the looting, we cannot have the burning, we cannot have the destruction that we had. And we are all about peaceful protests, right? We are also about law-abiding protests too. So you can protest and also follow laws, or you can protest and not follow laws. So that's that fine line we're always walking, but we have to be prepared. And if you think about this, the officers right now, I think, are a bit confused, right? So there's an extreme amount of violence going on. You know, there was, I think, 60 shootings within 60 days, or maybe a few more than that, and that equivalent number of stabbings, all in a given time this summer, right? And the city cops were taking 100 guns off the street, right? And the community that lives in those tough environments are thankful that they're police officers. And police officers feel like they're doing the job, but yet the same day, they're getting yelled at and called nasty names, and it can confuse someone. Like, I'm chasing people over fences and grabbing guns, and at the same day, I might be standing on a line and being called some nasty names. That can definitely affect morale. You know, if you look at you look at the doxing. You know, while police officers are standing on line, they're having cell phones in their face with their family members on it. I mean, talk about demoralizing, right? That could really hurt someone and make them question, you know, why are we doing this job? Why would I be a police officer right now? Not only am I risking my physical safety, but I'm risking the safety of my family and things like that. You know, all about peaceful protesting. You know, I've stood, I don't know how many protest lines in my career. I've stood war protests, I've stood abortion protest lines for hours and hours and hours, and we'll even stand in line and keep everybody safe when they're even yelling at us, and maybe for a good reason. But also it has to be not only just peaceful, it has to be lawful, and that's where I think some people are getting confused. What's the difference between peaceful and lawful? And that's where some people can get confused in this whole protest thing.
Mm-hmm. What's your response to those who say there's systemic racism or just implicit bias within police departments? Yeah,
and so yes, in society, right? So police departments are probably the most visible form of government. But if you think of, you know, I use the civil service exam process, right? I've been trying to diversify the sheriff's office since I got here. And we increased the number of people taking the test, the police, by 55%. Minorities went up 55%. But even if 55% more people take the test, that still will not allow me to hire any of those minorities if they don't score high enough on some test. That's a random test coming out of Albany, right? It still doesn't open up the door. That's a structural thing that we can work on to give me a better choice, a bigger field of people that I can bring into my organization. Because of hiring, it's all about me. I always say when I go to hire someone, it's all about me at that time. I'm the coach and I want the best bench possible. So if I want diversity, I want someone that can sign, I want someone with a psychological degree or an IT degree. Those are things we're doing all the time. Allow me to see those people and maybe grab some of those people. But, you know, that's a structural thing that we can easily, I think, break down with this time that we're given now in Albany with legislation and change civil service to allow us to hire. That's just one example. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the systems, you know, people talked about bail reform. You know, and bail reform was not fair because minorities were getting locked up and they didn't have $150 for bail, but you know, some other kid from the suburbs had $150 and one sat in jail, one didn't. I agree 1,000%. That's not right. That's not the way the system's designed. The systems shouldn't be that. But with that, we also got to keep in mind there should be a safety consideration there, right? For someone that, you know, if someone's just arrested for a violation, but we know he's going to go back and kill his wife. He's telling us in the backseat of the police car, when I get out of here, I'm going back. We got to have a system to look at those things too. So these are all structural things that if you live in a minority community, you grew up in this environment, you're looking at like, man, this whole world's stacked against me. And those are fair conversations. Those are conversations we should have. And tell me what you think. Tell me how you believe. Tell me why you believe that. Never thought of it that way. Those are wide open conversations that we should, and I think that's the time we're given now to have these conversations.
I know you don't want to talk about the specifics of the Daniel Prude case. At the same time, when asked about it before, you've talked about empathy.
Yeah.
I've heard you say that.
You know, you look at all these cases and some, you know, did they follow policy? We always want to argue, did they follow a procedure? Did they follow a trained technique, right? And we look at that, but really did they follow a human being? I look at, you know, Mr. Floyd's death and again, policy, procedure, how about, you know, that's a human being right there, and we all know positional asphyxiation. We've been trained in this for years. We all know excited delirium. We've been trained in this for years. So what is disconnecting here? That someone's not walking up and tapping someone on the shoulder and saying, all right, get him off, roll him over, get him on his you know, into a gurney as quick as possible, or sit up in a seated position. And I look at that and I'm like, I think we get callous. I think we get, you know, in the mode of being a police officer, and we forget, you know, sometimes why we signed up for the job. And that's easy to do. this is a job that's tough. They're going 911 call, 911 call, and it's all negative, negative, negative. And if we don't take care of our troops, we don't take care of ourselves mentally, you can get callous in this job pretty easy. And so those are things that we should definitely look at that case and every other case and say, policies and procedures, general orders, we got all that. We can always review. We do every case, but what are we doing for the officer to make sure they're not getting, callous? What are we doing for the officer to make sure they're set? What are we doing for a sergeant who rolls on scene to say that he can go around and adjust, the situation as he sees it then and make it a better situation for everybody involved? That's what I'm looking for, out of these things. And, if I can give my cops anything, my deputies, have a heart of gold, have compassion. Don't let this job get to you too much, and it will. We're humans.
Last question, Chief Singletary, you and he had a pretty close relationship, as you had to, professionally. Your thoughts on his decision to retire?
That absolutely is stunning. He is just a wonderful person. Again, we can sit back. As leaders, we make decisions. That's what our job description is doing. Not other people do the work for us, right? And we make decisions that are good, bad. We make decisions, and they're not always going to be perfect. But to call his question his integrity, to call him anything but an honorable person, I would never even dream of doing that. He's just a wonderful person. I was his class counselor 20 years ago in the academy. I taught him for 6 straight months in the academy. We knew what type of person he was then. And then to have, LaRon next door, think how precious this is. I'm a 55-year-old white male that's been a cop for 30-some years. He's obviously younger, African-American, to bounce ideas off each other, not just tactical decisions or, manpower deployment, but, hey, what do you think about this? We post-Floyd, I don't know how many times we talked after Mr. Floyd's death, of what are we going to do with this? We want to form a group, MCAT-CP we formed, right? And what do you think about it? Who should be involved? What stakeholders do we need? He has a perspective that I don't have, so I'm going to miss that like there's no tomorrow. Obviously, he's a great person. He was a great cop, but he was a confidant that I could call upon and get bounce things off sometimes several times a week. And vice versa, he'd call me and say, hey, what do you think about this? And that's what good friends do for each other, but also good leaders phone a friend, right? And get a different perspective on something.
I did want to just go on a slight tangent, and this will be my last question. COVID-19, it was a challenge at the jail, for any jail, but especially this one where you have more than some of the other counties. How has that process been now that we've gone past the 6-month mark?
I cannot be more impressed with my staff. We are originally on the COVID world. We thought the world was coming to an end, right? We all started preparing for that. Morgues were being set up. There was thinking about food distribution points and domestic violence going off the charts. And we started doing all this stuff in law enforcement. And one of the things that was very concerning, because we've seen what was happening across the country, is the jail population becoming overrun with COVID. My staff went overboard. They went over the top. We were probably the first one to shut off visitations, which is a very difficult thing to do in a jail. It's not good for the inmate, and it's not good for the family that has someone incarcerated. We started doing quarantines, 14-day quarantines. Anybody that's booked into the jail will stay in a quarantine area for 14 days. That's very manpower intensive to hold people in that isolation, if you will, for 14 days for their safety and everybody else's. We started screening everybody before they came in the jail. And I got to say, and then when we do have a case inside the jail, whether it's an inmate or the contact tracing, we've gone so far above what the CDC recommends and what Monroe County recommends. The contact trace 14 days back, our definition of a contact is way more conservative, if you will, than anybody else's. Like if you were even close to someone that's positive, get them out of here, right? We can't afford it. It's 800 moving people inside those walls every day, 800, and people are coming and going every day. And the potential for that virus to spread through that is huge. So they've done an absolute stellar job, and it's not gone. We realize that. Now is the time to maintain the protocols, right? Maintain the culture that we developed inside there. The inmates were incredible. I mean, I got to say, the inmates were on board keeping that place safe. They were helping us sanitize. They were asking for PPE. They were going around scrubbing. 3 times a week or 3 times a day. We'd scrub the whole place down. Inmates were helping.
Wow.
They didn't want it in there either. And that's a testimony that everybody says, we're here, we're stuck together inside this building, 800 of us every day, but we'll take care of each other.